everybody, it's Dean. Welcome to Bring Back Rock. Today we're talking about underrated albums from 1986. Now in the 1985 video I mentioned that the floodgates opened and we kind of recapped the year on what that meant. But this year the dam just collapsed. Everybody was coming out. The second wave came out with bands like Cinderella releasing their debut, Poison releasing their debut, Tesla releasing their debut, and there was a lot more coming right behind them. Thrash entered the mainstream. All four of the big four released really breakout albums that year. Slayer, Rain and Blood went gold. Anthrax, Among the Living went gold. Peace Sells, But Who's Buying with Megadeth went platinum. And Master of Puppets by Metallica just broke them into the mainstream as well and earned them a spot on the Monsters of Rock tour with their next album. Who else? Let's see. Other breakthrough albums. Stryper, To Hell with the Devil. They had a big hit with Honestly. Two bands that didn't break through this year with their releases. Queensryche, Rage for Order. Great White, Shot in the Dark. But their next albums would break them through. Who else did we have there? Europe, who had released albums prior to the Final Countdown, but the Final Countdown came out and you hear that song everywhere, but they also had hits with Carrie and Rock the Night. And then the granddaddy of all breakout albums was Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. That went from their kind of a gold selling band all the way to diamond selling band and headlining arenas all over the world, becoming one of the biggest bands of the decade. You also had some frontmen that went solo that year. King Diamond released Fatal Portrait after leaving Merciful Fate. And of course, David Lee Roth released his first full-length album, Eat 'Em and Smile, after leaving Van Halen. And that backup band of Dave's may have been the most talented band ever. I mean, Steve, if you're going to replace Eddie Van Halen, you can't replace Eddie Van Halen, but if you're going to try, you get another wizard on the guitar who's got a different style than Eddie, but still an amazing guitar player. Billy Sheehan was doing things on bass nobody else was doing at the time, and Greg Bissonette was awesome. And of course, that meant Van Halen released their first album without Dave. The Van Hagar years were born. They released 5150, which was probably their best album in my opinion with Sammy Hagar. Great album. I tell you, these two bands hit it out of the park on their own respectively. We also had some classic metal bands releasing albums that year. Judas Priest changed their style a little bit and released Turbo, which some people were disappointed with, but I actually love that album, so you're not going to hear me ragging on that one at all. Somewhere in Time by Iron Maiden. Ozzy released The Ultimate Sin, the second album with Jakey Lee, which I thought was amazing. And Rat released Dancing Undercover, their third studio album already. So a lot was happening in the world of rock and metal in 1986. And here are a lot of bands that kind of flew under the radar. I thought I was going to do two parts here because I had so many bands. I had over 20 bands that I had listed, albums. I think I whittled it down to 14, 15, something like that. So I want to hear from you guys. I want to see if you mentioned some of the ones that I scratched off the list. You always come up with something that I kick myself for forgetting. And so tell me who I forgot in the comments below. And now let's get started with my underrated albums from 1986. All right, my first underrated album from 1986. I kind of did these more or less alphabetical, but Black and Blue, they've been here before on my underrated list. The album was Nasty Nasty. It was their third record. Gene Simmons produced it. A lot of people, I loved Without Love, but a lot of people didn't like it, thought it was a little too polished, a little too mainstream after their debut. And they had, of course, Bruce Fairbairn produced that one, and Bon Jovi heard it, and then they got him for Slippery When Wet, etc. It had a rawer sound. It only made it to 110 on the Billboard charts. The lead-off track, Nasty Nasty, that morphed into Domino by Kiss on the Revenge album. They also had songs like 12 O'Clock High, the title track, like I said, Does She or Doesn't She? Just a really solid album by Black and Blue. It's one that I listened to initially and kind of said it was okay, and then I kind of put it away, and then I kind of rediscovered it a few years later and thought it was much better than I had remembered. So Nasty Nasty by Black and Blue. Another band was Bonfire. Bonfire released their album Don't Touch the Light. They're from Germany. This was their first international album. They had released some independent albums in Germany before they changed their name. They were called Cacumen, C-A-C-U-M-E-N. No idea what that means. There were some Scorpions comparisons. Like I said, this is their worldwide debut. Had songs and a video for Staring Eyes, Hot to Rock, and SDI. They also have re-recorded and re-released these albums with new vocalists. They're much heavier. I love the original Don't Touch the Light. That's the one I grew up with, but if you go on the streaming channels, you're going to find the re-recordings of them. All right, so after that, we had a band called Brighton Rock, another Canadian band. I've been talking a lot about Canadian bands. Brighton Rock released their full-length major label debut in Young, Wild, and Free. They had a lot more success in Canada than they did here. It was their first full-length album, like I said. It was on Warner Brothers. They had released a self-titled EP. This one went to 82 in Canada and went gold. They had a couple of singles that did well in Canada. We Came to Rock and Can't Wait for the Night. But they really didn't have nearly as much success here in the US. So Brighton Rock, Young, Wild, and Free, another underrated album. Next, we have a classic performer, Alice Cooper's Constrictor. Alice Cooper's last two albums did not chart. So he took like a 3-year hiatus out of, from making music. Met up, of course, with Kane Roberts on guitar. Kip Winger was also in the band. He is quite talented bassist. So they got together, they put out Constrictor in 1986. A few things about Constrictor, obviously. They had the video for the Friday the 13th Part 6 song, He's Back, the Man Behind the Mask, which, by the way, went #1 in Sweden. They also recorded, one of the songs on there was The Great American Success Story, which was supposed to be used in Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School movie, but ended up not getting used. It did go to number 59 on the Billboard charts, and really, I really like by Alice Cooper. Next one, another classic artist, Joan Jett. She released Good Music in 1986. Now, I read one review that said something like, if good music doesn't become a huge album, there's something wrong with the music industry. It did not become a huge album. Her next one did, however. But Good Music was, like I said, released in 86. It went to 105 on the Billboard charts. There was a video for the title track, but it was not really played much on MTV. It also had a song that was featured in Light of Day, the movie with Michael J. Fox. It was really a solid, This Means War was the song, by the way. Really a solid record by Joan Jett, one that I really kind of brought me back in the fold to her. So good music, not quite as heavy, but just a lot of good tunes on there. Another band that pretty much makes my every one of my underrated albums lists is Keel. And Keel released their second major label album, The Final Frontier, in 1986. Also produced by Gene Simmons. So he produced that Black and Blue album and the Keel record. The Final Frontier was their highest charting album, which went to number 53 on the charts. The company really probably doomed this record trying to find a hit. They put their two ballads as the two singles, Because the Night and Tears of Fire, and they really probably should have put a rocker on there, but they didn't. They chose the two. They're looking for a single, and they ignored songs like The Final Frontier, Arm and a Leg, Rock and Roll Animal. Just a lot of really good rockers they could have chose for Keel's second album. They're like the first video probably, but they didn't. And The Final Frontier, their highest charting, fairly successful, but it still didn't break the band like they had hoped and wanted to. Next up, we have the Killer Dwarfs. This was their second record. The first album I thought was okay, but I didn't really love. This album I really loved. It's on Maze Records. Who? I don't know. I didn't look up to see who else they had on Maze Records, but not a major label. They did, however, get some MTV airplay for their two videos, Stand Tall and Keep the Spirit Alive. The album actually, did pretty well because of that and got them a major label deal. Some people were comparing them to the new wave of British heavy metal bands. They had some great songs. Standouts were things like Animalize, Do or Die, Don't Bite the Hand That Feeds, and the two singles. The whole album's actually really, really good. So Killer Dwarfs, Stand Tall on Maze Records was underrated in 1986. Next we have King Cobra, Thrill of a Lifetime. It was their second album on Capitol Records. It was a little more commercial than the last one. It had the single that was also on the Iron Eagle soundtrack, Iron Eagle Never Say Die. Some fans, like I said, didn't love the new, more commercial approach. It was their last major label release before members kind of started leaving and finding success with other projects, unfortunately. The next album that was underrated, in my opinion, is Quiet Riot 3. Love Metal Health. That was really kind of one of the albums, if not the album, that really first got me into the hard rock, heavy metal scene. Quiet Riot 3, when it first came out, I loved the video. If you remember, the video was just the wild and the young. It was kind of a dystopian future where in the future there would be, if you remember the guy on the news saying, no rock and roll, no rock and roll. It's a pretty cool song, pretty cool album. But when I first heard it, I thought it was a little soft. They had put a lot more keyboards into it. They're going less metal, more power pop almost. Some of the songs were still rocking, and I kind of was surprised by that and put it aside. But once again, when I revisited it a little while later, I really dug Quiet Riot 3. Chuck Wright was back on bass after Rudy Sarzo left. Chuck obviously was in Jafria and had done a couple songs on the Metal Health record. Standouts for me were Rise and Fall, Helping Hands, Main Attraction, and the lead single and video, The Wild and the Young, which you talked about. Like I said, Chuck Wright was in Jafria. That song almost made my underrated list, or that album, Silk and Steel, almost made my underrated list. But Quiet Riot 3 definitely makes my underrated list for 1986. And here's what I consider the next album, the best soundtrack ever. It's amazing. It's by Fastway, and it's from the movie Trick or Treat. So the Trick or Treat soundtrack by Fastway. Definitely an underrated album from 1986. Let's see. It was released about a month after the film was released. It went to 156 on the charts. You know the film, and you can check out my video on it and the soundtrack, which has a lot of cool information, including a pre-WASP Scream Until You Like It recording, and find out where that was in the film. That's called a teaser, so go check out the Trick or Treat episode. Standout tracks here, the whole damn thing. The title track, Stand Up, Don't Stop the Fight, Get Tough, all of them, great. Also included were 2 previously recorded tracks and release tracks, Heft off of their debut, and If You Could See off of All Fired Up. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the movie Trick or Treat, which obviously had Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons kind of doing cameos in it, and just a really great 80s horror movie. All right, let's see who we got next. Next, I have Vinnie Vincent, Invasion. Their debut album for Vinnie Vincent, obviously. Really a solid album. It was their debut, went to 64 on the Billboard charts. You probably know Dana Strum was on bass and Bobby Rock was on drums. Robert Fleischman did the vocals, but he was replaced by Mark Slaughter following the release of the album, but Mark appeared in the lead-off video, Boys Are Gonna Rock. Great album full of good songs that were probably overpowered by Vinnie shredding, but if you like over-the-top guitars, then this is definitely the album for you. Like I said, didn't go gold, went to 64, but it got a lot of love retroactively. Well, at the time, Kerrang! Rated it the 8th best album of 1986. They also released it 100 on their list of 100 greatest metal albums. Rolling Stone named it the 39th greatest hair metal album of all time. And in the book Fargo Rock City, he named it the 2nd best album of the 80s, behind only Appetite for Destruction. Now, I really like this album. I actually thought their second album was even better, which we'll talk about later, but number 2 sounds pretty high. But I really do like this album. Oh, and just to get this reference in, the song Back on the Streets was re-recorded by the band 3 Speed, and made it in the movie The Voyage of the Rock Aliens. Truly an original movie starring Pia Zadora, and a cult film that I really enjoyed more than I should have. Another big album that came out in 1986 by a fairly big band, wearing a shirt right now, Wasp's Inside the Electric Circus, just didn't get the love I thought it deserved. Let's see, it went to 60 on the billboards. The first single, 9-5 Nasty, didn't even get an official video. There is a live one released later. The second single, I Don't Need No Doctor, was a cover. It did have a video, but it just did not seem like the label was behind this one at all. I loved it. Standout songs were 9-5 Nasty, and I've always wanted this picture disc of 9-5 Nasty and just haven't gotten it yet. Inside the Electric Circus, great opening track. The Rock Rolls On, Restless Gypsy, Shoot from the Hip. So many. I really, really dig this record. Inside the Electric Circus by WASP gets some love, but still underrated. Only going to 64, and I just, should have been bigger. Next is a heavy metal band I like this album. It's called Scarred for Life by Obsession. I really love their second one even more, which I'm sure we'll talk about when I get to that year. But Obsession, they released Scarred for Life in 1986. Vocalist Michael Viscera later played with Yngwie Malmsteen and Loudness, among others. They had released an EP prior called Martial Law. It's a very metal album. The title track, and yes, it's juvenile, but I was juvenile when it came out. Bang Them Till They Bleed is another song I really dug off there. Like I said, their next album's better, but right now we're talking about this one, Scarred for Life, 1986, by Obsession, an underrated album. Now, we've kind of gotten to the end, but there was a few more that I really wanted to list. The Raid, the fans of Slave Raider would have my head if I didn't mention their debut album, Take the World by Storm, which was really good. I told this before. My friend who's from Rochester, Minnesota, actually introduced me to the band. The band was from the Twin Cities, and it was released independently, and then Jive Records later re-released it. Great songs out there: Backstabbin', Burnin' Too Hot, the title track. Really, really good, and they got better with their next album even. So Slave Raider, Take the World by Storm. Also, White Wolf, Endangered Species, was a band that I had talked about earlier. I have a video earlier. You can go watch my White Wolf video to find out what kind of happened to derail Endangered Species. Good album. She was the video and single, and was actually gaining momentum when things kind of went off the rails. We also have the metal band Sword. Metalized is the name of the album. It came out in 85 and is loved by a lot of metalheads out there. Two bands actually I kind of wanted to just mention were the Suicide Twins and Cherry Bombs. If you like Hanoi Rocks, Nasty Suicide and Andy McCoy were in both bands. The Suicide Twins, which is more of a kind of acoustic, mellow thing, and then the rock band, the Cherry Bombs, they had going on at the same time. The next one I want to mention is London, Don't Cry Wolf, came out in 1986. If you remember, they're pretty prominently featured in The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, the metal years. They're most well known for having people pass through the band and then find success after. Nikki Sixx, Blackie Lawless, Izzy Stradlin, Fred Coury, and more. For Whom the Bell Tolls is on this record, which WASP also later recorded. It was co-written by Blackie Lawless. So London, Don't Cry Wolf was 1986. All right, that's it. That's a lot from 1986. A lot. But I still know there's more, and I know you're going to tell me who they are in the comments below. Who did I miss? Who did you love in 86 that doesn't get the love that they deserve? Keep them coming. Let me know. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next episode.